Navigating one's consciousness can be a very tricky journey. One of the books I was gifted recently, called The Wisdom of No Escape, talks about turning the focus inside and the work that it takes to pacify the mind. It talks about how this is a warrior's journey because you're choosing a path that few take in a lifetime, and you will get no praise. Like, nobody gives a shit that you're working on yourself. You're wading through your own shit, and there are numerous boogie traps set to fuck you over. You're deciding to live with your heart open. When your heart is open, it's easy to get hurt, but you choose to leave it open despite the thorns you may encounter. Our ego is the biggest con man we will ever encounter. It knows us best, and our familiarity with it makes it hard to see through. No matter how long you work on yourself, you will encounter insight about yourself, about reality that when spoken into language can sound very wise, simple, and brilliant. It's very easy to start to see oneself as better than, or more aware, or more enlightened than the people around you, that you actually develop an identity of egotism tied to spirituality. In this episode of the Chattabox, I wanted to talk about the idea of spiritual egotism, and really the ego at large, because it is a mirror we use to develop depth and inner peace. How do you identify your ego? How do you develop clarity to see the difference between the non-self and the self? And how do you release your attachment to the ego? One of the delusions I've always found interesting was this idea of developing a God complex, a sense of superiority. I remember in 10th grade psych class, our professor had mentioned that during his time studying for his degree, that he'd worked at or went to this mental facility where there was an entire wing known as the Jesus wing, and that there were many people that believed they were God, that they had the vision to save the world. Obviously, I thought those people were crazy, but it stuck with me, this idea that people could see themselves as that powerful. Though most people will never develop the perspective that they are the next coming of the Lord, the development of a sense of superiority is easy to manifest. Without a doubt, we all have at some point thought that we were better than somebody else. School reinforces this idea of superiority. Sports does, work does. Everything structured in our society creates a bell curve of those at the top 1% and those at the bottom 1%. And we all strive to be the best at something because it fuels our need to be special, to be recognized, to be important. You have to be crazy to believe that you can change the world. Sometimes we look at people with these complexes and we pity them, thinking that that could never be me. I'm not a narcissist. What, me? No way. When I was a kid, I never cared about being special. The concept hadn't really sunk its teeth into my mental ignorance, and it allowed for my heart to be truly open. There was no rush to be something. It felt like I had all the time in the world. Selfish, sure, I am an only child, but I never viewed myself as better or worse than my peers. In school, it started to become obvious that I had more academic success than my peers. But I did that mostly because of my love of learning and less to do with my drive to be number one. But the people around me didn't see it that way. And slowly they began rewarding me for my intellect, telling me things that I was destined for greatness, that I was special, better than my peers, and they rewarded me with awards and certificates and titles that reinforced this idea in my head that I was something. And before I could even realize what had happened to my young, impressionable mind, I had become obsessed with being someone. I had to live up to the expectations my community had for me, because otherwise, what? I would be a failure? Like, oh, the ego does not like that because failure hurts too much. Like, fuck no. As I studied history and learned about the greats, family dynasties, it fueled this idea of being someone worth remembering, building a legacy. What the stories of these greats failed to teach me was all the people that invested in their success to be greats. All their teachers, all the soldiers that died so that they could live, all the pain they endured, all the guilt they may have felt, all the shame, all the sleepless nights. All that was left was not the truth, but a beautiful story, the archetype of greatness, of the conqueror, of the hero. And I ate that shit up, not knowing any better. History is like a zip file. It's a compression of the true depth and color of what life was like for humans long ago. When we think of our own history, we rarely remember the true depth of our experiences, but are only able to hold on to faint, ever fading memories that are just enough to keep this personality we call me, alive. I got so comfortable with all the external validation I received that I stopped giving it to myself and became dependent on the world seeing me to feel worthy. And I desperately wanted their attention because I was no longer giving myself the validation I needed within. Dealing with my emotions became too much of a burden, too much of a distraction. Why feel guilty because I was being a dick to my friends in the name of tough love when I should be focusing on the next test, the next goal, the next accomplishment that would get me the praise I failed to give myself? But the yardstick always moved further and further away. The goals kept getting bigger and bigger, and before I knew it, even the praise felt numb. The awards were just a piece of paper that I'd rather give to my friends because they were the ones getting more and more distant, because of this superficial wall of superiority that was building inside of me. I was no longer that little girl that just loved to be, loved to learn, loved to bond. I was so blinded by my obsession with legacy that I failed to see the legacy is built through engagement with community, not giving up my internal power to my community. But I was blind and obsessed. My ego convinced me that I needed to be a millionaire, that I needed to invent something great, that I needed to settle down, that I should want what society said I should. And when I achieved all of that, I would be happy because I wasn't. I couldn't even be aware of my own happiness because my focus was always in the future. Delayed gratification was my mantra. I was ruled by my ego and I suffered over and over and over again because I could never make it happy. Nothing was ever enough. But I convinced myself if I could just make more, do more, be more, that would be my salvation. I admire the soul because it is a force, a flame that no matter how hard I try to extinguish, burned brighter and brighter, ignoring my resistance to it. In high school, I knew I was on a doomed path, but I didn't know how to save myself from myself. My ego dominated me, and I was so successful, so why question it? Anytime I had doubt, my ego doubled down. You have to work harder. Just push yourself more and more and more. You're strong. You've got this. You just got to keep pushing. Stress is only weakness if you view it that way. And through brute force, I pushed and pushed and I achieved. But did I feel any better? No. And I would think, what point would I stop kidding myself that this is working when it clearly isn't? My warrior's journey showed me that I'm emotional as fuck. And I was so good at running away from my emotions because I confused being a coward with strength. I was too afraid to face myself, too afraid to feel because it takes a lot of energy to feel things. And it's so much more convenient to ignore and suppress. I sit here and tell you guys, how you should be patient and have faith when I'm the least patient and most controlling person I know. I tell myself to have faith, but all I do is try to control everything I can. It was through control that my ego reaffirmed itself. The last 5 to 6 months have been an emotional roller coaster for me. That I sometimes sit with myself and wonder who the fuck I am anymore because all the bullshit things that I have been holding on to, I realize don't even matter. But they feed my ego, my sense of self, my need to be seen, to be special, and it all started when I locked my heart away and put it on a shelf because it was easier to stomach than to face. I didn't want to be seen as weak or soft or turbulent. I was tired of being told that I was too much, that I stopped being enough for myself and sacrificed who I was to please the people around me. I chose to stay in spaces where I wasn't even wanted just so I didn't have to face the pain of being alone. But enough is enough. There's only so much bullshit you can stomach before you begin to throw it all up. Some of us are better at eating shit than others. Turns out, I'm allergic. One of the labels I really struggled with was the need to be viewed as smart, to be special. And one of the things I spoke with my coach about was always feeling like people viewed me as egotistical when I felt like I was more loving than egotistical. I understand that quantitatively an A is not the same as an F, and that if ranked, I too fell somewhere on the bell curve. And to deny that I, in fact, felt superior in some dimensions of my being meant that I failed to acknowledge and love all the parts that felt inferior. Together, we discussed 3 tools I could use to monitor if my ego was in a state of narcissism or not, despite how others viewed me, and it was this. If I was curious about what others had to say, if I was open to the fact that people have lots to offer and their perspective could complement my own, and third, if I simply respected them as a person with all the baggage of chaos of being, then I would remain receptive enough to not be narcissistic, even if I disagree and even if I was taken as an asshole. The issue with egotism is only an issue when we fail to acknowledge our point of connection with those around us, when we create a wall of separation when there isn't one. You become a delusional ass if you think you and only you are God, but you become more open when you recognize you and everyone else is God. You are special and so are they. The reason those people deserve to be in a mental facility wasn't because they thought that they were the next coming of God, but because they thought they were the only reincarnation of God. In mental contemplative spaces, especially those rooted in Buddhism, there is this saying that goes that if you meet Buddha on the path to enlightenment, you should kill him. In our minds, we create many identities of who we think we should be. Each personality highlights a part of ourselves that we need to love and give our attention, so that we can pacify the mind and return to our true self, non-ego and intrinsic oneness. When you get on the spiritual or even religious path, we like to create archetypes, those that know and those that don't. In religious circles, we call them priests. In spiritual circles, maybe it's your guru or a monk you admire, like the Buddha. We create an enlightened version of ourselves, the peaceful one, the tranquil one. But each self we create just shows that we continue to see ourselves as divided and not whole. That there's a version of yourself to aspire towards, rather than accepting the fucked up whole that you simply are. We judge the world as we judge ourselves. If we see the world as a place filled with problems worth fixing, it just shows that you see yourself as flawed. It has been excruciatingly painful to love the parts of myself that I have judged for so many years, the parts that felt unworthy and that I shoved in a closet and simply ignored. The lost link of letting go of one's ego is the ultimate heartbreak. To truly walk in faith, heart open, fearlessly, it's fucking hard. I constantly find myself wanting to hide rather than face the reality that is, because the experience is so deep and so moving that it's so much easier to live a life in dullness. But someone once told me that it is my emotional turbulence that just shows how alive I am. Life is not about a goal. It's not about achieving shit. It's about connection and experience, and our experiences are deeply emotional. So many of us are focused on getting something out of life that we're constantly missing the point. And look, for some of us, running the hamster wheel of sensation is what you wished for in this experience. Going through the motions of attainment to realize that it gets you nowhere may just be the lesson you needed to learn in this life. Maybe raising a family, raising a child doesn't fill your own emptiness, is what you needed to learn, and that is okay. You don't need to beat yourself up about it. That is your ego trying to exert control. For me, my obsession with achievement has robbed me of presence, of deeply bursting from my belly with laughter and connection, of giving myself the space and silence to fucking cry and yell and break shit. I have reached the point where looking outside of myself for validation and purpose is a path doomed. No amount of stuff or clout is going to fill the hole in my heart for my own love. Letting go of measuring my life success based only on achievement is a hard pill to swallow. And failing to meet the expectations of others, even myself, is really challenging. But I'm doing my best to sit with the parts of me that get triggered and have compassion for all the hard work my ego has done to get me to this place. I don't have all the answers, and people that tell you otherwise, run. How do you identify your ego? How do I identify mine? There are a few ways. Usually it happens through language. Anytime I use the word I, me, mine, usually this is my ego talking. Now it can be confusing because how else do you refer to yourself without these words? But it's a subtle distinction. We don't throw away language, but be aware of who is speaking. I speak because I am. Point blank, period. Your ego is not something to get rid of. for there wouldn't be a conception of non-self from which to engage with the sensual plane. The point is to recognize, to be aware of when it emerges, what triggers the use of thoughts linked to I and me, and what stories do you tell yourself about yourself? How you develop clarity to see the difference between non-self and self. Meditation. Meditation gives you the spaciousness to see the ego emerge. The ego will emerge because you exist. Think about the thing that is focusing your attention versus the thoughts that emerge. Your attention shifts all the time. What is doing that? And how is that different from the narrative that develops about the things you are focused on? If you want to come out of your non-self or ego, you can use the breath, for it's linked with the present moment. How do you release your attachment to the ego? When you are aware of your ego, aware of the stories it spins, you can take a deep breath. And if you focus on that breath, you therefore are not focused on the thoughts manifested by your ego. If you do that enough, it gets easier. And again, this is a warrior's journey. It doesn't happen overnight. It's actually interesting because I was talking to my meditation guide about this concept of enlightenment, as part of like the spiritual journey. And for me, I was having a really hard time because for me, the whole point is to accept myself in the present, and not to create this sort of enlightened version that I feel like I need to become, like that there's work that still needs to be done on me. And I felt like I really struggled with it because I was trying so hard to figure out how to get to this place, which is enlightenment, like how to be able to let go of suffering that just occurs, in our day-to-day experiences. And I think, for the first time I had sort of grace and clarity around what it even means to be enlightened truly. Because again, like when we think of these concepts, it creates ideas in our minds that create delusions that like we feed off of. And it kind of becomes counterintuitive to the work that we claim that we're trying to do, right? Which is to better ourselves and to be more compassionate for ourselves. And I recognize in this discussion with him that every time we are aware and in the present, right? Because a lot of the time we're sort of like in our mind space or like on autopilot or not really thinking, about what it is that we're doing. We're kind of just like going with the flow, like reacting habitually. Every time we're able to stop and recognize that, and it happens in meditation, like when you're sitting and meditating in Vipassana and you're focused on the breath, but your mind wanders, but you're able to catch it wandering and come back to the breath. That moment of recognition, that moment of like, oh shit, this is a story that I'm spinning. That moment of, oh wait, I think I'm in pain, but when I really focus on the pain, I recognize that it fades away and there was actually spaciousness and relief in that experience of pain. All of those moments, that is awakening, that is enlightenment right there in that moment. And oftentimes our egos don't see that, right? Like we're so caught up in the idea of what these experiences are, of what it means to be in this state that we view as superior or better than the state that we're in. We miss that, and that's ignorance that manifests, and it's one of the three states. Like you're either in pleasure, ignorance, or a negative experience. Like we're either in a positive state of mind, ignorance, or a negative state of mind. And the practice of coming back, of using your awareness to come back to the present, that is the process of liberation. And oftentimes we don't see that in our day-to-day experiences. We're only sampling our life at this very like broad rate that we really miss out a lot of the magic that's happening in those smaller micro moments. I want to end this podcast by sharing an analogy that I came up with my coach about the ego, and we both found it like pretty funny. So imagine you're on a boat floating down a river and you look around and there are other people on the same river. Some are on smaller boats, some are on bigger boats, some are just on floats. The boat is flowing, but you look around and you see that some of your friends float past you, but they aren't even doing anything. They're just laying on a floaty, going with the current. You could be enjoying the flow, soaking up the sun, but no, you decide that you're on the wrong spot and you actually need to stir the boat into the faster currents. as you do this, you actually fuck up the flow and end up on the bank. And now you're pissed because everybody's floating past you and you're stuck on the bank. But the harder you try to fix things, the more you get stuck. You think that you've been steering this boat with this huge, beautiful captain wheel, but it turns out that the wheel that you think you're steering isn't even attached to anything. Not the boat, not to nothing, but you've convinced yourself that you're steering the boat and it's your fault that it's stuck. So you take a deep breath and you decide not to fight the current, and slowly but surely you begin flowing down the river. The flow of consciousness, the flow of life is like the river. We're all moving with it, some faster than others. But our egos create an illusion that we're going too slow or wants to rush the process and tries to get involved to correct things. Only this leaves you frustrated and defeated because you cannot control the flow of the river or the current, and you suffer over and over again thinking that you can. Even if you catch a good current for a bit, you think that you're doing it, and it reinforces your need to get involved with the flow. Life is going to do what it's going to do. You can waste it judging everyone else and miss out on all the joys available to you in the moment. Either way, we're all going to end up at the same destination. How you choose to flow down this river is up to you. You can choose to be ignorant and fight the river, or you can open yourself to the experiences available to you and truly soak up every second. The choice is yours. For me, I'm done fighting the current, trying to paddle faster. From now on, I'm going to kick back and enjoy the ride. I have no clue what the fuck I'm going to see, but I will do my best to keep my heart open and my mind present, so I don't miss a second of all the gifts around me. I recognize, for a long time, I felt like I was living my life sort of in low resolution. You know what I mean? You're experiencing everything, you're there, but you're not really able to feel and truly experience the depths of the moments that unfold for you. And I felt like I reached a point where I realized that life was way too beautiful of a gift. Being a human, truly having this human experience is too much of a gift to simply just not be able to witness its grandness and vividness and be able to soak it up, because I'm so caught up in my mind that I'm not able to truly be open to the experience. And for me, that's just something that at the end of the day, I recognize it's whether or not I had the low res experience or, the 4K experience, it doesn't change life, right? We are the ones that are ultimately attributing meaning to all of it. The isness of life, the isness of our experience, of our being here is what it is, whether we're here to appreciate it or not. But I want to appreciate it. I truly want to be a witness to its grandness, because to me, it's absolutely incredible. And so that's what I'm going to be doing for a while, guys. I am going to take a break so that I can truly be a part of the isness that is. Because there's so much greatness that happens in this life, but we get so bogged down on the have-tos and the should-haves and the need to feel seen, the need to feel like we're doing something. When really our job was never to do anything. It was simply to just be here, to be human, to truly sit in our humanness instead of trying to repress it and pretend to be something that we're simply not. We're emotional. Be emotional. It doesn't make you a bad person. And if you're not ready to be emotional, it doesn't mean that you're not human either. I recognize there's nothing that we can do that is truly wrong, and I know that's, controversial, because morally there are things that we define as agreeable or not. But what I mean is ultimately the isness that is not judgmental of what your experience amounts to. It's when our egos start to compare and create ideas of what life should be that we suffer. Because ultimately only the ego suffers. And it's not to say that we get rid of it. It's not to say that we say, oh, it's your fault that I suffer and you should be destroyed. No, it's to truly open our hearts up to the fact that suffering is part of the isness. and to recognize that doesn't have to be the whole experience, and in fact, there's more to it than just suffering. And if we can make peace with the suffering that we experience, if we can reduce our need to add to that fire of suffering in our own experiences, if we can recognize the hilariousness in our need to feel special, if we can laugh with our need to be a narcissist, our need to play a role, our need to be recognized, if we can have compassion for these parts of ourselves and to hear them and cry with them and laugh with them, we recognize that we're not so fractured, that there actually isn't really anything that needs to be fixed, and that you are always perfect, and that you have always been enlightened, whether or not you recognized it or not. And that's the great thing about the isness, is that it doesn't matter what you end up doing, right? It doesn't matter if you decide anything at all. What matters is, can you be here for the fullness of it? Like, can you truly be here for it? And if not, so what? It won't make or break anything. But I don't know. I've just decided that I really want to be here for that. And so that's what I'm going to do. And we'll see what happens. I'll definitely come back because I love you guys and I love the podcast. But I just need some time, to really just sit with the awesomeness that is. And I hope that you give yourself the opportunity to experience that as well. And if you want to talk about it more, find me, reach me. We can definitely chat. But I hope that this summer, you guys give yourselves the opportunity to just bear witness to the miracles that happen to us every freaking day. And it can only be seen when you truly sit with the isness, when you truly embrace our humanity, what makes us human, the fact that we can experience the world this way. Because there is a vividness that is calling your attention home.